The recall by General Motors earlier this year of 2.6 million vehicles for a defective ignition switch that went largely ignored by the company and federal auto safety regulators for more than a decade has once again opened the eyes of the American public and policymakers to the challenges we face in keeping our vehicles and highways safe for the driving public. One of the things that was most concerning to me was the issue of a question being asked of the manufacturers, what caused this accident when there had been a death? And the notion that this was an optional answer. Now, I know you've only been there a year and a half, a little less than a year and a half, and you've only been in charge since January, but can you briefly give us some reassurance as how the world, the regulators in charge of investigating deadly defects, would say the cause of an accident is an optional question?
Thank you, Chairman. My understanding of the history of this issue is that in 2006, under the Bush administration, that question was made optional in an attempt to encourage automakers to volunteer more information that wouldn't necessarily be subject to confidential business information. Once I found out about this issue and discussed with my staff the history of it and discussed with them the fact that it hasn't seemed to have helped elucidate more information from the automakers, I've had that practice stopped. So going forward with the next batch of requests from the industry, that will no longer be an optional question. I agree with you that it should not be optional.
Well, you understand that that reflects on a culture that is frightening, frankly. You know, it's not a secret I come from a background of being a prosecutor, and when you want to get to the truth and you want to find out what happened, if you make the answers to questions optional, that's a journey that is never going to be successful. I understand you're here to defend NHTSA, and no one on this subcommittee believes that there are not good, hardworking people at NHTSA that are trying to do the right thing. But it is very hard to sit through this hearing and watch you rationalize and excuse a regulatory agency that, whether it was 300 or, as the article specifically said, 2,000 complaints talking about stalling on the vehicles that were eventually recalled, when you had a lonely highway patrolman in Wisconsin figuring it out, when you had a study that your agency was part of at Indiana that figured it out, and you didn't figure it out. You had citizens who were sleuthing your database on their own. They were going into your database and figuring out that there was a pattern. One of them even went to their own expense and hired a lawyer to come to NHTSA and say, hey, we're looking at your database and you've got a problem. Still, we have insufficient information to conduct an investigation. Now, maybe you can't see the forest for the trees, but I can assure you on this side of the dais, it appears that you are digging yourself a hole of saying we did nothing wrong, we did it all right, there was not a problem, this is all GM's fault, shame on GM. Now, we've all said shame on GM, and we've said it vociferously from this committee room. But you have got to take some responsibility that this is not being handled correctly for the American driving public within the government regulatory agency.